Okay, well, I'm going to start introduce, and I'm delighted to welcome Professor Chen Hsiung back to UC Irvine in her capacity as UC Irvine's CIPSH Chair in New Humanities. CIPSH, which is the French acronym for International Council for Philosophy and the Human Sciences, is an international organization of UNESCO that brings together representatives of international scholarly organizations in a wide range of humanistic and social scientific disciplines, particularly with kind of the cultural side of the social sciences. It has a very storied history, early in the founding of UNESCO, and I would also say a renewed presence and level of activity today, including its increased visibility in Asia, for which our distinguished chair can take some substantial credit. When the opportunity to apply for and host one of CIPSH's new chairs, which was a program that was started, I believe, not too long before the pandemic, and therefore also when I was coming to UC Irvine, I remember a few colleagues coming into my office and saying, there's this new opportunity and we'd like to do something about it. I was eager to see this happen at UC Irvine, and in fact, through our application and through the virtues of Professor Hsiung, it did. She was appointed as one of the inaugural cohort of chairs. Now, as you well know, 2020 saw a few other developments globally. It was the year of the pandemic, as we all recall, and experiments in international connections were rendered rather difficult for a few years. But also thanks to CIPSH, they made possible renewal beyond the initial term of the chair's appointment, and thanks to that, we look forward an additional time to welcoming you back in the framework of the program. I'll also mention that our own association with CIPSH as a school has been valuable in a number of ways, including my own personal closer relations to CIPSH. I've had the opportunity to attend a couple of their conferences and to speak to the CIPSH group, as well as other programs of UNESCO. And I'll mention also just recently an initiative that is in train to collaborate with colleagues in Portugal around landscape, the environment, and cultural heritage, with integral contributions from the humanities as well as other disciplines. We've also had previous collaborations around food studies and medical humanities. Professor Hsiung has occupied many different academic and leadership roles, of which I can really only mention a few of a very long and distinguished list. She's been Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at Taiwan University, the Dean of the Arts at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, Chair of the Department of History at the Chinese University, and the K.T. Lee Chair at National Central University in Taiwan. She's a founding fellow of the Hong Kong Academy of Humanities and Social Sciences. In connection with UNESCO, she's currently Secretary General of CIPSH, as well as the UNESCO Chair in Global Asia and Humanities through McGill University in Canada. She earned her bachelor's degree at Taiwan University in history, then went on to earn her MA and Ph.D. in history from Brown University, as well as a Master's of Science in Population Studies and International Health from Harvard's School of Public Health. And I mentioned this diverse background of her education because it's really clear that she embraces such a wide ambit of research, scholarship, and leadership, and even policy insofar as we could talk about policy in the humanistic fields. Her specific foci of research include Russian intellectual and cultural history, gender studies, history of children and pediatric medicine, public health, science and technology studies, medical humanities, as well as more broad topics in late imperial and modern China. This Friday, she'll be helping to kick off the UCI Humanities Center's year-long theme on food and nurturance, in a roundtable discussion that's entitled Islands, Nations, and the Global Circulation of Asian Food, for which we thank you in advance. But today I'm pleased to introduce your solo lecture and the comments and discussion to ensue. The talk is entitled A New Era, Global Humanities and Developments in China. I anticipate that she'll be illuminating us not just about the specific resonances that the new era term has in China, but also the prospects and possibilities for the future, and how we engage in humanistic inquiry in an international ambit and with international partners and interlocutors. We'll have formal responses by Professor Hu Ying of UCI's Department of East Asian Studies and Professor Jerry Lee of the Department of English, who's also the director of the program in Global Languages and Cultures and of the International Center for Writing and Translation. But before the responses, the talk, and Professor Hsiung, welcome.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Harris, for that, your kind words. Thank all of you for being here. What I'd like to do is to share with you from the perspective of CIPSH, the International Council of Philosophy and Human Sciences, what's going on in global humanities. Also, my recent experiences and collaborations with Greater China about the humanities and academic developments in that region. I like to do that because I really think that Irvine has a special role to play, and I will explain why. Okay, 10 years ago, for the first time, American Historical Review brought forth their issue on global humanities. Global history, it's called, global history. And they came to me to write about the evolution of Chinese humanities. The reason being, they say we can't talk about global history without explaining what's going on in China. I agree. So I made, I wrote this piece 10 years ago that explained how Chinese humanities was established institutionally in the modern era, which was basically founded, to put a long story short, on a trilogy, namely to men of women of letters in the Chinese world, literature, history, and philosophy. The Trinity, it's called. It's what they've, people, scholars, for generations, had decided to turn their long classical education in the four treasures, the classics, the history, the philosophy, the letters, on into the forms of campus-based humanities. All right, so that's China side, in summary. But if we were to look at the development in the last century, after World War II, when UNESCO was established and CIPSH also was brought to bear, that was characterized by disciplinary humanities. Therefore, first of all, for CIPSH, it's unspoken, but the backdrop of modern nation state was there because each of the disciplinary based member organizations, would have come in as we're national organizations and regional organizations. And yet, for China, because of this literature and history and philosophy background, there were disciplines that are harder. You're going to find it less happening in the Chinese academic scene than in, let's say, in America and Europe. For instance, anthropology, religious studies, art history, lots of things. And okay, so UN, if we look at things from New York and Paris, never had an academic arm. We could probe later about why, but in any event, CIPSH comes closest to that. When that was established, it still had a footprint of not early 20th century, but even 19th century sort of configuration intellectually. So you won't find gender studies, cultural studies, lots and lots of things. Now, are very active, important core to our intellectual lives research universities. They're not in UNESCO, they're not in CIPSH. All right. I will explain later how CIPSH lately will try to make up for these loopholes. All right. So if you look at UNESCO, it has two councils, International Science Council and International Council for Philosophy and Human Sciences. There used to be a social science council until 2018. They decided to dissolve themselves. It's a complicated story, we could talk about it later, but in any event, we only have two now. So the qualitative social science would come to CIPSH, and the quantitative things would go to International Science Council. Together with the Science Council, CIPSH, we form a committee, advisory committee, to the Secretary General of UN with annual reports of things. All right, so this is the larger picture. This is what CIPSH look like. If you go on our website, you will see that since 1949, when we were established, so last year we celebrated our 75th anniversary, and with many activities, and Professor Judy Wu, along with others, gave us the keynote. Anyway, so these are all disciplinary based. We have 24 of these. Could be history, archaeology, could be religious studies, language, literature, athletics, and so on and so forth. Philosophy was the first one to establish, and therefore we now still have the name of philosophy and human sciences. It's called sciences still. Okay, so CIPSH thinks has discovered that our academic world have moved forward with research universities, comprehensive, important, taking a lead in the development, research, and teaching in arts and letters, and many important interdisciplinary fields now are at core of humanities in many parts of the world. And so CIPSH, I think I met CIPSH in 2015. That's when CIPSH was to decide whether it wants to continue to be or to do like social sciences have done, to cancel it out. The reason being, after 2012, UNESCO ceased to have funding to these councils. The sciences still has their membership fees and things. Anyway, so CIPSH then had a first World Humanity Conference in Liège, 2017. And there it established, decided to do a few things. One, to follow the footprint of UNESCO to establish some chairs. I will explain later why there's a need to do that. In any event, I was very, very pleased that I could come to Irvine with my proposal to apply for a CIPSH Chair on Humanities. Each chair, you can read the list down, has its own themes. Is distinct and separate and individual. So what that new humanities meant then was very, very simple. It meant that we want to propose interdisciplinary studies, that's all. Because CIPSH then in 2015 and 17 had not that. All these other CIPSH chairs you could read down, some on, ethnic studies, linguistic studies, and time or cultural heritage. Our latest, I think 2 years ago, we finally had a chair on linguistics and biodiversity in Africa. That's very important. We have the geoethics in Rome. And this year, we're inaugurating one in Inner Mongolia. So you could see that CIPSH is trying its best to stretch, to be inclusive and open. The second thing we did is to get a CCK fund to establish an academy that meet with for a week. They live together on themes and then try to bring basically European studies and Chinese or Asian studies together. This started happening in 2020. You could see that ethics and arts, education were some of the things. 2 weeks ago, we just had one academy on water scab management. All right, so these were the two CIPSH initiatives, wanting to work with research university networks, wanting to be in touch with the latest developments of humanities worldwide. All right, now next, let me share with you with some of my observations about Chinese university, humanities in Chinese universities. I began by saying that academic humanities represented by Chinese universities have their own characteristics. It started up with literature, history, philosophy, but if you look across the campuses, there's no such thing as general GE, general education. There will be language, Chinese language and English languages. There will be politics, and that's basically it. There's no humanities, social science courses across the board. And I want to show you, this is the global picture in terms of compositions of our global academy, if there is a thing. United States altogether have roughly 4,000 higher education institutions, Europe about 3,500, coming close. China had about roughly 3,000, growing. The regular undergraduate universities, we call, in China produce altogether 11 million graduates every year. Their vocational colleges and universities produce another 34 million. So you add those numbers together, it means that they produce 45 million every year. Yes, the workforce also seeking employment. So, but those at the elite level, it is very clear that engineering school continues to take the lead in Chinese, um, let's say, state building and planning. But if you look at these distinguished institutions such as Harbin Institute of Technology or Beijing University of Aerospace and Aeronautics, you visited with them. They're outstanding, of course, in their specialty. And you could, read a newspaper, know their achievements. And the same can be spoken about Chinese University of Science and Technology or the University of Oceanography. The thing is that they also do not have GE. They have language, they have Chinese English, and they have politics. So that's one. And if you want to look at their training ground for law, political science, finance, economics, that's the general picture. When they quickly become leaders of their country and even beyond China, you will see that that's the makeup of their education. Secondly, I would like to share with you that across China, you would find, next time when you visit China, you could see in almost every leading cities or provinces, they have language universities. And they have these foreign language universities, altogether a few dozen, more than 50. They teach 5 leading languages plus 100 minor languages. They produce all of their talents to work with the rest of the world, not just in translation. They are there, in terms of working in diplomacy, journalism, all the foreign trade negotiations and everything. In Hong Kong, we work closely with their faculties and management. This, I think, will continue to set China apart from other parts of the world in terms of planned development, in terms of manpower training, because they only started with the sort of institutional higher education in the 80s. So we're talking about these developments in a matter of 3 to 4 decades. But they have this. And humanities used to be called in China openly as the least costly, namely cheapest way to expand tertiary education. It's still the case. All right, because you don't need labs, you just need to hire some better teachers and come in and lecture to the students. All right, okay, so there's this specialty high-tech university, then there's these language universities. Now I would like to also bring your attention to this. This is hardly mentioned outside of China, but they took this very seriously. China has over 200 normal universities. 200 normal universities. Some of them very, very good research universities, as you heard of Beijing Normal U or Huadong or lots of those, right? But they bring out teachers for all preschools, elementary school, and secondary schools. They're all public schools. They make sure that their education is safely anchored by quality teachers. This is set them apart. I mean, France used to have normal schools. This country used to have, for a short period of time, we have teachers' college and things, right? But very few leading universities, countries now still will stick to this normal education system. Okay. After this, fast growing phenomenon achievements in the past 3-4 decades, what did China uh, decide to do? A number of things. But one of the things that had caught the attention of the region in East Asia, especially Southeast Asia, South China, South Asia, and Europe is this. China began to call itself a people, 民族, that's coming back, revive itself with a civilizational claim. That what China has is not a culture, it's a civilization. It's not the culture of a modern state like everybody else has, but it has a civilization that goes back to 1,000 or 2,000 years. China began to receive prime minister from India in Xi'an rather than Beijing. And they are going to, this is I'm not saying this is done without debate. It continue, I heard a lot of discussion and debate about this, not as much in this country, but this civilizational claim of China. Not just as a soft power, but as something that would take China out of all of the rest of the states and be on a different category. It's a civilizational state. India made a few attempts to say that Indian has a civilization toward the Arab world. But in Europe, people noted that Greece and Italy had never claimed that, not yet at least. Egypt never did that, not yet. And so what does this mean, especially as it relates to the substance studies, research, interpretations from the humanities about a society, a population that represents a civilization? All right, now I'm going to quickly mention a few other things. Late recent developments that's noteworthy. One, you all have heard of Fudan, and many of you have been to Fudan. This past June, 3-4 months ago, Fudan celebrated its 120th anniversary. Its president decided to take that occasion to announce to the world that Fudan is going to slash 50% of its humanities intake students and give them to engineering, which they did not have that much. It shows the pressure that even for a university as renowned as Fudan is bearing about the short-term pressure from technology, high-tech, AI. But also, what remain relevant means in China. It means trying to keep the students, the undergraduate students who graduate from the college to find a job. They used to have these students going to graduate school or going abroad. Going abroad is becoming lesser. Going to graduate school is also not as easy. And Fudan used to, until this announcement, takes in 4,000 undergraduate humanities majors. The president announced saying that they're going to give half of those, 2,000 every year, to engineering to develop 6 clusters of, and when this president chose to, I thought he's a really brave soul, because I couldn't believe it when we heard that publicly announced in a press conference, with all the alums and everybody. All right, so we still don't know what will come to Fudan, because that's one thing. The other thing is that many leading universities in China decided to move the subject of philosophy upstairs to graduate school, that they would no longer be undergraduate philosophy majors. Note that China never had arts and science majors. They've talked about that, but they not have that yet. And therefore, people all come in declared majors. If you don't have philosophy majors, undergraduate, where would the graduate school, the philosophy graduate school programs have students from? People are asking, so that's note 2. Note 3, many leading universities, Sichuan, Xiamen, they all decided to make their humanities schools take on applied teachers. So history becomes history and tourism, or history and museum studies. I'm not asking us to make judgmental views about these decisions. I'm just sharing from a sort of short distance what's happening within China. All right, which prompt scholars within Chinese border, scholars such as Wang Hui, to say that people should hold on to humanities because humanities would be like Zhuangzi, give you the use of uselessness. All right. I can't tell how these voices could hold up. We met with Wang Hui. Last semester I was in Germany. And so together, within China, outside of China, in Paris or elsewhere, people are asking now, what is 21st century going to take us to? Paris had just told us that in 2020, when we started off with many of these projects, no one knew that pandemic would come back. I mean, I studied in public school, the Department of Epidemiology all thought that we're done with smallpox and this and that, and it came back. Okay, of course, many other things happened in 2022 that first give some circles the idea that maybe a long 20th century just hang on that didn't get done until 2020. And then by 2020, everybody is forced to think ahead. We're not fortune tellers, so what do we see? Interim of something that's been suggested. Interim between what? Paradigms, breakthroughs, clashes. Let me add 2 things and we can have a discussion. If you are asking these questions within the Chinese border, or outside of Chinese border, but in a short distance, 2 other things, 2 other elements have been mentioned in the context for consideration. One, there's still the question of the need of critical thinking. There needs to be the space. The liberty, or however people want to call it. I contributed an article to this did medicine and Paul Pickowicz, one of them called Restless China. This was done in a conference in Chinese U. And there we asked a question about where's the space for critical thinking. This was 15 years ago. This things have been quoted by scholars or emphasized by scholars within China. They want China to either be urged, to pressed, encouraged to open up. When we have stronger challenges and pressures, is it easier or more difficult to open up? That would be one question. Now, everybody knows that resources are tightening up and opportunity is shrinking, and international collaboration, incoming, outgoings, exchanges happen less frequently. Secondly, there have been questions raised about what would be the academic aspect of the quote phenomenon of the rise of China. Is there something called scholarly China that's also rising, or is it something else? This is the other thing. Some time ago, leading publishers in Europe and this country wanted to bring out the journal to share with the educated audience in a nutshell about what's happening in academic China. All right, therefore, I'm coming back to how we became New Humanities in Irvine. I thought we had the first 5-year run, 2020 to 2025. 3 of those years were taken by not being able to do much. But still, we were thinking just about interdisciplinary studies. Now, if indeed beyond 2020, look at this short, the beginning of a shorter 21st century, what's the newness going to be? Is it going to be different? Is it going to be fresh? I would like to say that whenever I return to Irvine, I truly think Irvine is different and fresh, not because of the weather or blue skies, not just because of the blue skies, because what continues to happen here was not happening elsewhere. I taught in Göttingen last spring, a whole semester, every week. Göttingen is not a bad university, but the resources, everything, not just on humanities, but in humanities as well. Universities and campuses are so clearly visible. Resources, positions, graduate student training, undergraduates sort of hope of doing something with their education. And yet, here at Irvine, in addition to what CIPSH imagined in 2017, and then we implemented in 2020 in terms of new humanities, back then it's only because UNESCO had chairs, but those chairs never had any humanities subjects. It's the chair, building bridges, taking care of mortality. I met a chair in Liège who's from Cincinnati. She's a chair on water. She's trying to coordinate 14 universities trying to provide water. Okay, but these UNESCO chairs, after being assessed a few decades down the line, they realized that without languages, philosophy, history, aesthetics, art history, the chair, the UNESCO chair, their accomplishment, they either couldn't do much or their accomplishment can be taken from under their feet. And so CIPSH decided to basically copy their form, the UNESCO chair application form, and create its own chair. That's the background of this chair. But now, if we were going to look not backward, but forward about 2025 onward for another 5 years, I would say CIPSH and Irvine, what Irvine represents, what CIPSH represents if we were to work together, if our chair could be the vehicle to be used in any way that we can. I think that's what I had thought of sharing with you when I was given this opportunity, half an hour, to prepare some report for our discussion. Thank you very much.
We've asked two of our humanities faculty to respond to these ideas, thinking about global humanities, thinking about China. And so Jerry Lee and Hu Ying are going to both speak. Jerry will speak first and then Hu Ying. Jerry Lee is a professor of applied linguistics in the Department of English here at UCI. And he holds affiliate faculty positions in the Department of Anthropology, Comparative Literature, East Asian Studies, and Asian American Studies. So as you can tell, he has a very wide range of research and scholarly interests. He also currently serves as the director of the International Center for Writing Translation and is the director of the program in Global Languages and Culture. And in 2022, he co-founded the UCI Global Asias, which is a multidisciplinary research cluster looking based in the Humanities Center, but including faculty from other parts of campus as well. And Hu Ying is professor of East Asian Studies, and she's a scholar of modern Chinese literature and culture, translation study, and feminist theories. And her research centers on the literature and culture of the late 19th century to the early 20th century, which she calls, and I thought this was very appropriate, a fascinating period that witnessed rapid changes in every aspect of the Chinese world. And we're still now, or perhaps again, in a period of rapid changes. And her most recent book, Burying Autumn, Death, Poetry, and Friendship, was published by Harvard University Press, and it's currently being translated into Chinese to be published in China. And Hu Ying completed 6 years of higher education in China before receiving her Ph.D. in comparative literature at Princeton. So I'd like to ask the two of you, you can sit at the table, or if you want to each speak individually, however you would like to do it is fine with us. Yeah. You can use that one.
Hi, everyone, and Amanda, thank you for that introduction. It is my great honor to serve as a respondent to Professor Ping Chen, whose talk identifies for us a range of challenges that have faced and continue to face global humanities research, but I believe more importantly, gesture to potential opportunities. I will talk about both, but since I am by my nature sometimes a pessimist, I will speak first to challenges. Whenever university education comes to be instrumentalized to serve political ends, we need to be vigilant. I'm, of course, gesturing to the current unprecedented political moment in the US, but also to Professor Hsiung's mention of the expansion of Chinese university options as a response to the nation's modernization efforts. This all being said, Employability is a very real concern and an important consideration. In the humanities, we do have a responsibility to think systematically and intentionally about the relationship between education and employability. Many students pick majors that seem to have a clear path toward post-graduation employment. For example, business administration, engineering, or computer science. My personal strategy in overseeing the global cultures major has been promoting it as a top choice, as a double major, trying to appeal, for instance, to students who want to major in business administration, but also, in addition to global cultures, as an important complement for their training. Too often, students see major choice as an either-or consideration, and our university is very much structured with that, around that premise. So sometimes we need to remind them that it can, in fact, be a both and. Of course, it can be a problem when short-term considerations of employability are prioritized at the expense of scholarship and learning. What most students do not realize is that in reality, a majority of skills are acquired on the job, regardless of the profession. In fact, a common trait among highly successful people is an inherent passion for learning, not just skills, but ideas as well. This is where the humanities comes into play. We are uniquely positioned to show students the love of learning so they can continue to learn in all kinds of different ways, even long after completing their studies with us. Professor Hsiung references the phenomenon of the humanities curriculum lending itself to, or even prioritizing sometimes, applied outcomes. It is not that applied approaches to research are necessarily bad. Tourism and museum studies, citing the examples provided by Professor Hsiung, are important endeavors. However, when they come with the inherent risk of flattening the nuances of culture and cultural production to consumable forms. Therefore, it is important that we, as subject matter experts, drive conversations on what constitutes priorities for the applications of our work and research. Now, on to the opportunities. Professor Hsiung mentions opportunities in interdisciplinarity. Disciplinarity comes with its own set of challenges, of course. Disciplinarity can be gatekeeping, which can materialize as dogmatism or even censorship, especially for new ideas that challenge the status quo. But disciplinarity need not be abolished altogether. Disciplinarity demands expertise, which can only be achieved through careful and systematic commitment to the work. Therefore, I would like to make the case that by leaning into interdisciplinarity, we are in fact simultaneously doubling down on the significance of disciplinarity as well, approaching disciplinarity grounded in an ethic of care, collaboration, and a shared commitment to pursuing knowledge for the good of society. The higher education infrastructure is indeed different in China. Students in the US might find a level of specialization reflected in Chinese institutions, such as the University of Oceanography or the University of Agriculture, to be a stark contrast to what is more common in the US. Sure, we do have the occasional Cal Tech or Texas A&M, agricultural and mechanical, but they are arguably less common than the generic universities. However, I think the case of Penn State University is an interesting one. It was originally an agricultural university called Farmers High School. So high school, not high school, but high school. An institution whose mission and name is largely unrecognizable today given its contemporary research and teaching breadth. I mention this because it points to a larger story of how educational priorities must be willing to adapt to meet the evolving needs of its students and communities. For the humanities, I believe we need to maintain a willingness to communicate the significance of humanistic research to broader publics, as one example. This is admittedly something I need to work on myself. So it is actually very encouraging to see an organization as wide-reaching as UNESCO continue to be involved in supporting the humanities. I do strongly believe it is a clear reflection of the impact of the tireless work of scholar activists from the humanities, not dissimilar to the work being done by many of my colleagues in this room. So while earlier I joked that I'm a pessimist by nature, Professor Hsiung's remarks and her presence here in our vibrant research community makes me want to try being an optimist for once. Thank you.
A little further away from this one. Just now, Professor Hsiung gave us a global view of humanities with thought-provoking questions on China. And for us at UCI, I'm especially struck with Professor Hsiung's very up-to-date information on Fudan University's active shrinking of humanities. I was at Fudan some years ago leading the UC study abroad program, and its humanities were thriving. It was a real disheartening piece of information. And New York Times today, in its opinion page, has this one long article updating us on results from an Australian research institute. It's titled, Trump's Crackdown on Chinese Science Students Ignores a Startling New Reality. And the new reality that this research institute finds is that China is surpassing the US in science and technology research. With lots of numbers to show for it, I won't quote the numbers. It does concede that Chinese universities today still do not provide the sort of well-rounded education that Harvard and Yale do. With the kind of funding cuts, we'll see how that goes. So I will not tell any global stories. Instead, I'll give a few personal stories. I'm hoping my personal stories will serve as a kind of footnote to Professor Hsiung's lecture. So when I was in the last years of high school, I switched from STEM track to humanities track against the advice of my instructors at the time. The prevailing slogan then was that if you master math, physics, and chemistry, you can go all over the world without being afraid of anybody. So conquer the world with STEM, not with humanities. And you could say this sort of battle of the classics had been at the heart of Chinese humanities. In that traditional Chinese educational system was all humanities. You read the classics, you compose elegant essays, you write poetry, and that's how you get educated, and there was nothing on the job training about it. It's not at all vocational training. Voltaire thought that was the best thing ever. He thought that makes for a enlightened rulership, poets and philosophers, right? Being emperors, that would be the best thing. Except that by the late 19th century, bureaucrats who were good at composing poetry and writing calligraphy were not very effective in figuring out how to deal with gunboats and whatnot. And then by the late 19th century, China imported the Western classification system of knowledge, and that's where we have all the math and physics and chemistry. And the humanistic tradition did hold on in some corners. So Tsinghua University, the so-called MIT of China, established a School of National Learning. That's where I.A. Richards actually taught for some years. And yet, by the 1950s, Tsinghua was stripped of its humanities and liberal arts departments entirely. So it got forced into a engineering-only school. The humanities did not get restored until 3 decades later. And that is where Professor Wang Hui, the person that Professor Hsiung just quoted earlier, is teaching now. And I read his report. I read a big chunk of his report. It's an enormous report compiled by 20-some professors about humanities in China. And his report dated 2023 was still saying funding was plentiful for humanities. I'm wondering if it's, things are changing so fast in China now that 2023 report is already out of date. That I rather doubt that if Fudan is shrinking this badly on humanities, Tsinghua would escape a similar fate. So going on with my personal story, I didn't study math, physics, and chemistry. I went to study English. My old university president, Cai Yuanpei, bucked the trend half a century earlier by strengthening liberal arts education at the expense of engineering and business. He actually halted for some years enrollment in engineering and business and put the funding into humanities. So the reversal of what Fudan is doing and possibly Tsinghua is doing now. So I was studying a foreign language, not to say an enemy's language, that was just starting to gain popularity in China at the time, namely English. But more than gaining culture and history through a language, one professor's words really stuck with me. What he said is this. He said, learning a foreign language is like opening a new window. And I did, in fact, find that to be the case, that learning a foreign language is like a revelation and a transformation, like being able to look at the world through a pair of new eyes, to think different thoughts with a brand new vocabulary. And using this new pair of eyes and new vocabulary, not only to understand this world that I didn't know before, but also to understand myself and my own culture. That's how I ended up in the US and studying Comp Lit. So learning a foreign language is so much more than the rudimentary tasks that Google Translate can render now. So over the years, as an instructor at UCI, I've repeatedly seen this happen with our students, whatever their majors. I've seen our students experience this transformation in their classrooms, in our language classrooms on campus when they participate in UC study abroad programs. And when that program was cut short because of funding, I've seen it more recently in the new programs that UCI developed with Chen Hsiung University in Taiwan, the Huayu Best program, where we've had 3 years of student exchange, sending them to Taiwan for 10 weeks every summer. The kind of transformation students experience is really not the kind of AI translation that many people thought that therefore we would no longer need to learn a foreign language. So my last story is in properly literary. It's about a Chinese author that I've been translating in the last few years. His name is Xue Yiwei. One of the books he wrote is called Traveling with Marco Polo. It's a really strange book. It's part annotation, part translation, part sequel to Italo Calvino's book called Invisible Cities, in which Italo Calvino imagines Marco Polo talking to the aging Kublai Khan, who couldn't visit any of his cities anymore. So Marco Polo, this imaginary Marco Polo, would describe 50 cities, purely imaginary cities, to this aging Kublai Khan. So what this Chinese writer, this Chinese-Canadian writer, he resides in Canada, does is, in fact, insert himself into this conversation, this imaginary conversation between Kublai Khan and Marco Polo, and between Italo Calvino and Marco Polo. So that is a very, very interesting book that I translated a little bit of. Another novel that he's has written, most recent book, is called King Lear and 1979, in which the protagonist was living through this horrific period in recent Chinese history, the Cultural Revolution, anti-rightist movement, whatever. So he was going through hell. All the while, in his mind, he was remembering King Lear, which he played when he was in college. So King Lear was like this chorus, supplying line after line to respond to this incomprehensible, absurd experience that he was going through. This is a nice counterpart to Nanda's work recently about the Chinese tragedy of King Lear. So my point about bringing this particular Chinese writer as the last example is to say that he's traveled with many writers in the world. And he thinks of his hometown not as a particular place or a particular country or even a particular language. He describes his hometown, and let me quote his words, that his hometown is world literature. It's a land that does not concern itself with the advantage of particular classes, nor the myopia of this group or that, and especially not with the boundary of national borders. It is a homeland with the broadest territory and richest treasures. So even though in academic circles, world literature has gotten some heated debate, it does not prevent this Chinese writer from claiming world literature as his natural patrimony. So the point of claiming world literature is not so much a demand for ownership or access or fair access, but more for constructing a place for dialogue. So even as Xue Yiwei works to chronicle modern Chinese history in all its upheavals and big and small tragedies, he does so while holding sustained conversations with other writers who've done the same for their corners of the earth. And a place to dialogue may be where global humanities can also stake its claim as well.
And if you and Ying and Jerry would like to come sit up here and I'm sorry if those tall chairs are uncomfortable, but everybody can see. But just wanted to give Ping Chen a chance to ask any questions or make any comments on what they're meeting. Being shared a structural response and a personal response. And then if you have questions of each other or things you want to talk more about, then please do that initially. And then if we have any questions from the audience. Okay, and we are recording this on Zoom, so you'll be able to share it with your friends and colleagues as well.
Thank you. All right. Oh, let's see. I'd like to thank Jerry and Ying for their comments, and I'd like to respond and give you my immediate thoughts, because this lecture, this talk I prepared, it's sort of a self-inquiry tool. I continue these represent my recent observations, thoughts, and questions to myself. And I think both of you helped me to continue to think more about these questions, not necessarily the answers. Jerry's reminder that he said it's the challenges about being careful with the instrumental values or use of education. It's a very timely one. I tend to be optimist. I'm a diehard optimist, I should admit. But I think also it's important to maybe remember the uselessness of that Wang Hui and others said, not just about humanities, but also about education at large. I think it's nice to be cautioning about teleological and functional approach to education. But I would also like to say that I've taught in many classrooms within China. And sometimes it's hard to be not functional. Because these students tell us, the best students, I've taught it, Shanghai Jiao Tong, the best students you have, they have been grinding through the exam system, have read very little, almost no novels and things. And they would, if you take them out to lunch, they would say to you themselves, saying that we're nothing but, we're going to go through our college as nothing but our 4th year and 5th year and 6th year in high school. Because that's how they see their education and their roles. Anyway, this is, and so the employment for them, I have to think about how to get back with these further questions. Because I hope I would have a chance to prepare this talk on a different occasion. This is just freshly done. It's very much for this occasion alone. Then I would be able to think about some of these things that Jerry suggested, including, he's mentioning of the usefulness of discipline. I think that's terrific news for CIPSH, but I'm not sure that CIPSH will be willing to take it with full confidence that if we travel further down to disciplinarity, we should actually be rewarded with what we're doing, trying to, patch up its shortcomings. I really would like to, I would go and study more about the earlier histories of Penn State, because I'm also going to be teaching in part in a agricultural university in China called South China Agricultural University, which got started in the 19th century. I myself would like to know what's happening with oceanography and all these functional universities, which, very focused assignments. And then their assignment was to answer to their state cause, saying that the Chinese would always, we insist that we would hold our rice balls in our own hands, nobody else. We're not going to import rice or soybeans from any. All right, so that's my thanks to Jerry and to Ying's very interesting way to take us through these readings and personal experiences. If you move back and forth between East Asia and North America and Europe, then you may be like me to be asking yourself the questions, but not satisfying with the unclear answers you have. That's what I feel now. I actually don't know what would be happening to Fudan or what's happening in Tsinghua. I can't imagine slashing 50% of the first-class humanities undergraduates and replace it so quickly with 6 clusters of engineering research in Fudan. I also don't know what's happening with Wang Hui's national studies and other things that he and others compiled for us actually in the World Humanity Report. But what I do want to share with you is that I treasure very much my opportunity to be back regularly, to be in residence, and then to continue to hear from you about your questioning and your reminders. Thank you.
And we have a few minutes for questions. And I'd like to ask the first one, which is, Jim has been sharing about, or telling us about these examples of humanities being cut at Chinese universities, but we're seeing that happen in the United States. That even though the humanities are the least expensive in many ways in terms of education, we're seeing across the United States that there are universities that are eliminating their humanities departments or decreasing the faculty size. And if we're talking about global humanities in these two major countries cutting humanities, I'm wondering what the three of you, if you have any thoughts about how is that positioning, not just as our students and how we're educating students, but also how we are as scholars, humanities scholars, kind of out in the functioning out in the world.
What do you think? Outside, other than besides Irvine, is anybody in the U.S. campuses feel that humanities is being threatened or tightened up in any ways at all? Or that those were simply things happening elsewhere?
I mean, I would say that it's rare enough, it's a rare enough case that the humanities are holding steady or growing, that becomes newsworthy. And there's a few smaller, let's say, not research universities of the level of Irvine, but there are a few that have been reported, Berkeley being one, University of Arizona being another, where the humanities enrollments are growing, and UC Irvine is actually one, which we're very proud of. But it is a phenomenon, and unfortunately, I saw today there is a statistical study that issues regular reports on the numbers in the humanities, called Humanities Indicators, and that project, in fact, just today released a new set of data that show that humanities disciplines across the board, with the exception of studies of the arts, are all falling in enrollments and degrees granted. So it's a long-term trend, and part of it is it's driving the decisions about funding, but it's also in certain ways reflecting decisions that are made that then have the implication of falling enrollments, which then justify the cuts that have been made. And I think it's often presented as merely an objective situation, when in fact, very often there's a prescriptive dimension that involves judgments about the relative value of technology or science and humanities. So I think we can't keep our head in the sand about this and just say, well, we're doing things of value and eventually people will come around. There really is a problem, and it really takes, concerted action and advocacy and so forth. But that is the background picture, with a few exceptions, UC Irvine being one.
Yeah, Chronicle of Higher Education is saying nationally 15% decrease in humanities.
Of enrollment.
I guess majoring.
In arts and sciences, kind of, right?
Humanities. I getting back to Amanda's point, wanted to echo what Jerry said about double majoring. I had originally thought of that as a decent strategy for East Asian majors. Our students who have East Asian background and their parents don't really want them to be East Asian majors, but they themselves really want to learn Chinese, Japanese, Korean languages, and then become majors. I thought if I could drum up the idea of double major, they can appease their parents and still pursue what they want to do. And maybe the humanistic education would give them the long-term benefits, and whatever vocational major they take will get them an immediate job.
Right.
But now I can see that perhaps not just for East Asian majors, but for humanities majors, if we could put some serious emphasis. I mean, we did a sort of a pathway map to how, when, who, what kind of majors could double especially well with us, that sort of thing. If we do that with humanities majors, perhaps, maybe worth a try. I don't know if many students would be convinced, but it's amazing how many students are double or even triple.
I serve on the Phi Beta Kappa selection committee for the School of Humanities almost every year. And I'm always amazed, and those of us who are looking at the students, the high degree of academic standing of students who are double majoring, humanities and all kinds of things across campus. It's I'm always kind of surprised to see, oh, someone's double majoring in East Asian studies and physics, or there's really interesting combinations. But I also wanted just to mention that over in George, when George Van Denneville was dean, we were really trying to work closely with the International Engineering Program, which we continued under Kairos. But that's been such a challenge because the engineering degree is so structured that they barely have room for the GE credits that are required by the university. And it's much more difficult to figure out how to help them double major, and almost impossible sometimes it seems. But I know there's been one with Chinese language and Japanese and international engineering. Yes, and then German and international engineering. There was also in Korean and international engineering were the three programs that really tried to make that work. But it is kind of more, this very structured kind of degree program makes that difficult.
One of the ways that they've been able to make it work is if the study abroad program could include engineering classes in Japan, for example, then they don't lose out. It's tricky to build that perfect match.
Want to ask you? So this is, I want to first just share a few observations in relation to some of what you presented. I was really interested actually in your comment about the civilizational claim and Italy and Greece, kind of not making that civilizational claim. I think that's true in one regard, but I also think that there's a European ideology of classicism. It may not be Italy and Greece that's making that claim, but it was England, France, Germany, on the basis of Roman and Greek classicism that, there was a special civilizational mission to that. So anyway, that's just an observation about kind of our own civilizational ideologies that we've inherited and that have to some extent gone into eclipse or changed, but nevertheless, I think are very much a part of our historical culture coming out of Europe. The other thing I wanted to really ask about was the rather American notion of education in the liberal arts, the liberal education, various other terms, but the liberal arts are typically the terms that are used. And there is, there's definitely some parallels with the notions of education as ethical formation, as preparation for leadership, and, in the traditionally even for a much closer relationship to just being part of the governing elite and being capable of carrying out those tasks. The liberal arts now, I think, have gotten somewhat emptied out of that content dimension, but it's about a capacity to learn, it's about the capacity to adapt, to innovate, to lead, but leading, kind of as an intelligent response to motivating people and so forth, and not necessarily structured around traditional disciplines of rhetoric and history and so forth that would give you exemplars. So one question that I have is probably starting, I don't know, 10 or some years ago, there was a narrative that basically liberal arts in the United States, which invented the model of liberal arts, are in decline. But look what's happening in Asia, and including China, but also Singapore and other places that were in some ways either inviting American institutions in to kind of help cultivate the model, or in various ways were introducing university colleges that were often, in some cases, actually taught in English, but on a liberal arts model. So I haven't heard as much about that recently, and I just wonder what your view is about the question of whether the liberal arts kind of wave crashed and has dissipated, or whether that's still an area where it's not only humanities, obviously, but but humanities have an important role in that. So those are just a couple of observations in the question about liberal arts.
Thank you. Let me respond to I think Hu Ying's or Amanda's question first. That is, or also Jerry's earlier thing about humanities. Are we growing, or are we falling, or are there hidden cuts that are going to come to us? My sense of things are twofold. First of all, yes, I really think that we should be vigilant about when global resources are lessening, and for the academy too, then humanities need to either think of adapting, or to truly do something imaginative and then inventing something in terms of curriculum, degrees, and other things. I also thought that it's important to be strong and brave and try to train the truly talented young people in arts and letters, not only have them in math, Olympia, or physics and things, because, well, CIPSH just began this year to reward a junior fellow for the first time, across European and Asian training. And then we could reward to some even high school talents, just as a model who for years we're trying to raise funds to do a first work, first author prize. This could be anybody, could be, need not to be, sort of a definitive mature work, but some talent, young talent to be shown. I thought that, and there are some disciplines in our 24 disciplines that really need to start early and focus only on that, not to do, flexible things with other fields. Our last member organization is actually World Philology Association. Philology, everybody know. I mean, most would concede think that it's sort of declining or dying. But this group of philologists, its president is from Norway, Oslo. They just think that they just have to try to keep philology alive as a concentration, as a training, and those philology students are not going to do other things. They're just going to do philology all straight in the world that's going to reward them and make them. All right. So Tyrus's two questions. I'm so grateful that you mentioned those because I forgot to say what got me to mention to you about the civilizational claim is the very, very loud complaints from France and Germany. They say that even though, as you said, correctly pointed out, that Greece and Italy had not said anything about China's civilizational claims. But France, what France had, it's not a culture, it's a civilization. Germany also said, you go and look at, our monuments and tons of things. They're all about 2,000 years of civilization. So actually, when we were in Germany, we participated quite a number of conferences on civilizational claims alone. Europe versus China. And the scholars, many scholars, they're Chinese scholars who disagree with civilizational claims, strongly, think that we're just a modern state. That's it, cultural only. And there are many European scholars who want to say what Europe has is a civilization that goes back to before Aristotle things. And then it's not a modern culture. All right, so that's one. Liberal arts, liberal education, that's also very, very interesting. I have two things that I like to mention. First of all, the art schools in China, they're very active in wanting to either revive or maintain the training in the liberal tradition in arts, studio arts, creative arts, performing arts. Because I didn't mention those specialized universities, I only mentioned the high-tech group. But if you look at Chinese Academy of Performing Arts, even in Beijing, there's a Beijing Institute for Costume Studies, and then Beijing Institute for Dance. And I just visited, I shared with Judy about China Academy of Arts in Hangzhou, over 100. Those people are very, very serious, saying that in literature, history, and philosophy alone, could they train real artists in brushwork and all these creative arts and performing arts and dance and things? Okay, that's one. The other, it's this very interesting phenomenon. I don't know how to make of it yet, but it's not just in China, but also in Singapore, as you said, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, this endeavors to have little kids memorize all the poems, poetry, and classics. They want the next generation, the younger generation of Chinese to be versed in the old classics, not have it as a moral education, just basically as a daily experience in mathematics, basically. So that these little kids, 5, 7-year-olds, they've got all of the Tang poetry down. It's a lot of fun to see them. And then they do all kinds of other things. They also do sports and things and games, electronic games. But I've seen their works, these performing art academy. They have junior summer schools or other things. So in these two phenomenon, first of all, performing arts, creative arts, emphasizing that you have to get all of your classics down for you to be a good artist. Second of all, who have all the youngsters to finally, none of these people knew what is Cultural Revolution. You talk with them, their grandparents don't want to mention that. And so what would these people grow up to be? I don't know. But I think we can watch. Whatever it's worth.
Thank you, all of you, for speaking, for Jen for being here, and Jerry Lee for sharing their thoughts. And we will be optimistic, I think, and continue to partner over the next 5 years through this CIPSH Chair. So thank you.
Yeah, cool.